struggling this year. Does that change how you feel about this going into the series, or is it pretty?
No, it doesn't. No, I mean, you use those to watch film, and obviously the regular season, holds weight for sure, but it doesn't change how we approach it. It's still a playoff series. Doesn't matter who we play, and understand that we're always going to get their best shot. They're always going to get our best shot. It's plain and simple. We don't like each other, so it's just part of it.
Yeah, our habits that we built the last 11 games has been really good. I think we've been playing in a high level. Every game that we've played, we've competed. We've made it hard for every team that we faced. But now, it's the postseason. Regular season is over with. It doesn't mean nothing anymore. Like what our record was does not mean nothing. We finishing with an 8-game winning streak or 7, whatever it was. We can care less. Now it's the postseason. We just got to be locked in. Work for the next few days. We got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to get ready, and hopefully when we get to Indiana, we're locked in a good place and we can win game 1.
The NBA playoffs are back, and as fans, we're being treated to some phenomenal first-round matchups. But you already saw the title of this video and are fully aware of what team I cover, so you know what we're here for. Bucks, Pacers, round 2. Only this time, the stakes and circumstances are much different. First off, Giannis is back in the mix after missing all of last year's postseason with a left soleus strain, and his presence alone completely shifts the tone of this series. But on the flip side, the Bucks are opening these playoffs without Damian Lillard, who's still dealing with deep vein thrombosis in his right calf. And when you look at the rest of the rotation, outside of Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis, it's a very different squad compared to last season. Meanwhile, the Pacers' main core of players might look the same at a glance, but let's not forget, Pascal Siakam wasn't even half a season into his Indy tenure last year after coming over from the Raptors at the deadline. And now, he's had over a year to continue building chemistry with a group that he's already been on an Eastern Conference Finals run with. And to top it all off, it's Indiana that now holds home court this time around. So the stage is set. But before we dive into the analysis, let's rewind a bit and look at how we got here. The Bucks won the season series 3-1, but the only 2 matchups that really matter to me are the last 2. Number 1, because both teams were relatively healthy, and number 2, those games were played after the trade deadline, meaning we got to see a brief preview of Milwaukee's new-look roster against Indiana, and in those games, they split. So I wouldn't say the regular season gives us the full picture, but it does give us a lot of valuable film to pull from. And we'll begin by looking at how these 2 teams match up defensively, starting with how the Pacers will defend the Bucks' offense. Based on the regular season, I expect Indy's matchups to look somewhat like this. The only question mark is Andrew Nembhard, who typically drew the Lillard assignment, but I'm going to operate under the impression that Dame won't be available for this first-round series. However, I don't think that changes the fact that Nembhard will still guard the lead ball handler that's not Giannis Antetokounmpo, meaning he'll draw Ryan Rollins based on how Milwaukee has been starting games lately. But I don't think it would be the worst idea to start Kevin Porter Jr. either, which we'll discuss further when we get to the Bucks. But KPJ is another potential Nembhard matchup, depending on how Doc Rivers decides to start games. But like I just said, Nembhard will guard the lead ball handler, not named Giannis Antetokounmpo, which is important to note because since Lillard has been out, Milwaukee has decided against using a traditional point guard and has instead opted to run everything through the Greek Freak. So the question for Indy's defense is, how do they stop Giannis ball? Well, they've tried a few different things during the regular season. And the first thing I want to look at is how they defend high ball screens with Giannis as the primary ball handler. Because with GA at the helm, you know he's going to get a ridiculous number of these with the intent of getting him downhill. And to prevent that, Indiana likes to hard hedge these screens to force Giannis to make a play and get the ball out of his hands. And while it can be effective in accomplishing the latter, it does create a lot of open looks for GA's teammates, as guys like AJ Green, Gary Trent Jr., and Brook Lopez will all thrive on open three-point looks from above the break if the hedger isn't able to recover back to his man. Taurean Prince is another guy who will greatly benefit from this too, especially given the fact that the man ranked 3rd in the NBA in three-point percentage throughout the regular season. However, as Jason Timpf from the Hoops Tonight podcast described him, TP is a bit gun-shy, which is a strangely accurate statement, because Prince typically doesn't like to pull the trigger unless he's got some room to work with. And because of that, you'll often see him attack the late closeout and penetrate. And he's been especially good at exploiting Tyrese Halliburton in those spots during the season series, whether that's by getting his own bucket or kicking it back out to an open teammate on the perimeter, which is extremely valuable because the more players you have that can attack closeouts and get 2 feet into the paint, the more potent your offense will be. However, to Hallie's credit, he's probably Indiana's best Giannis hedger, given his active hands and 6'8" wingspan that can cause GA some trouble at times. But getting back to the Pacers' general defensive schemes, Giannis is really the only guy they'll hard hedge off a screen. They'd do it to Dame too if he was healthy, but he's not. They'll defend everyone else coming off a screen, with a big playing at the level. But I'm curious to see if that changes for a guy like Kevin Porter Jr., who, like Dame, can get his own shot and create for others. Because again, during the regular season, he was no exception. The Pacers played him at the level. The only time they hard hedged was late in their final matchup of the season, but this was only because the Pacers were in desperation mode, trying to come back from a late deficit. But as this playoff series goes on, I'd expect Indy to begin hard hedging his ball screens more consistently, because he'll likely be Milwaukee's second option in this series. Anyways, if Giannis penetrates baseline after crossing the timeline, or the Bucks get into their sets with GA catching the rock at the elbow, the Pacers will always send help from one pass away at that elbow/nail area to trap Giannis along the baseline and again, get the ball out of his hands by forcing him to make a decision. But they don't always send this help right away, and that can sometimes hurt them, because the Pacers don't really have an ideal Giannis defender on their team, and if they allow him to go one-on-one, he'll fry them. So it's pretty imperative for their nail help to rotate over in time to prevent an easy Giannis bucket, and just make it a little bit tougher on him. But now let's say Giannis wants to attack middle off the dribble, or he's rolling towards the middle. Indy will typically pack the paint by sending over an extra defender to help off the weak side corner, and their most effective guy in this spot, believe it or not, is probably Tyrese Halliburton. I've seen guys like Aaron Nesmith and Miles Turner smoke this rotation a couple of times, but Halliburton's anticipation and off-ball rotations to prevent these Giannis advantages are extremely timely, and again, his length can sometimes be a disruptor. So say what you want about him when defending the ball, but he's a fairly good off-ball defender. With that in mind though, he can lose his man at times trying to overhelp. So Milwaukee will have to take advantage of that and notice it when it happens. But of all the Pacers' major defensive schemes, I had to save the best for last. Because of course, you know they're going to be in their man full court press all game long, which could be especially effective in this series with Dame out, because then Milwaukee is relying a lot on Ryan Rollins and Kevin Porter Jr. to deal with this press. And that's not ideal given KPJ had moments of struggle with Indy's full court ball pressure throughout the regular season, and although Rollins only played 1 minute of action for the Bucks during this season series, he just tends to panic at the sight of extended ball pressure. So advantage, Indiana. But Milwaukee did see a lot of success in having Brook Lopez go into the backcourt to screen for the guards, because not only does this free them up from that initial ball pressure, but it pulls Miles Turner, or whoever the Pacers' big is that's in the game, with Brook into the backcourt. So when the ball does cross over half court, the Bucks can quickly turn to Giannis, so he can go ISO with no help defender at the rim, which again netted Milwaukee some positive returns in previous matchups. And if I'm Indy, I'd be very careful with this type of full court pressure should Giannis be the guy to bring the ball up the floor. Some other miscellaneous things Indiana will probably do from a defensive perspective is help off of Kyle Kuzma given his lack of floor spacing, which will be especially effective if the Bucks ever decide to go small with Kuz on the floor, because this allows Indiana to put Miles Turner in the game and have him take the Kuzma assignment with the sole purpose of having him roam, meaning if Kuz wants to stay on the floor and close games, he'll need to be an active cutter at the right time, which he was able to do a few times during the regular season. But as of late, Kuz has not been closing games, so this will be a big time thing to look out for the Bucks. We'll also probably see Rick Carlisle deploy a 2-3 zone every now and again, just to show the Bucks a new look, but it really hasn't given Milwaukee any trouble outside of their first matchup of the season. Which brings us to how the Bucks will defend the Pacers' offense, starting with individual matchups, which according to the regular season will look something like this. But this isn't a perfect example because we're assuming Ryan Rollins just takes Aaron Nesmith because that's who Dame typically matched up with. But Dame was on him for a reason, because he's not a good enough point of attack defender to keep up with either of Tyrese Halliburton or Andrew Nembhard, and obviously he doesn't have the size to cover Pascal Siakam or Miles Turner, which left Aaron Nesmith. But even against Nesmith, Dame had his on-ball deficiencies, and sometimes he got burned by him off of a closeout. Ryan Rollins is not that type of defender. In fact, he's easily one of the best defensive players on the Bucks roster, and his on-ball pressure is pretty elite. So he'd be a perfect candidate to guard Tyrese Halliburton, while Taurean Prince could shift into more of an off-ball role against Aaron Nesmith, which is perfect, because TP is not good at defending the ball. Simple as that. I don't know why Doc Rivers has trusted him to guard the lead ball handler in so many different matchups, because that's just not his role. Rollins, on the other hand, would thrive given that opportunity. But even then, I don't think Ryan Rollins should start this series. I'm just expecting him to, given how the Bucks have been starting games in Dame's absence. But as I mentioned earlier, I think Kevin Porter Jr. would be better equipped to start this series. I just trust him more than I do Rollins to handle Indy's full court ball pressure, and he gives the Bucks more offensive creation in that starting lineup. Rollins can definitely still be effective in guarding Halliburton, TJ McConnell, or whoever might be handling the ball from the second unit, but I trust KPJ as a starter far more, and he'd still be much better suited to defend Halliburton than Taurean Prince. Which brings us to the Bucks' general defensive schemes. Milwaukee is a team that's big on not allowing middle penetration, especially against this fast-paced Indiana squad. So their perimeter defenders will do everything they can to force Indy towards the sideline and baseline, typically by icing a ton of ball screens and switching everything above the break 1 through 4. But with this style of switching comes mismatches. And whenever Milwaukee has a guard defending a big on the block, and they can't intentionally foul or switch out in time, they're often forced to send a double by having the weak side defender rotate over, which leaves the opposite corner wide open. But one of the Bucks' more effective defensive schemes as of late has been their sensational play out of 2-3, a coverage that could be big in slowing down Indy's fast-paced offense at times. And we saw its effectiveness in the Bucks' comeback win over the Pacers on December 31st. The one thing to look out for when Milwaukee turns to this zone-style coverage is how Indy breaks it, as they love to send a third man above the break, typically a big that can space like a Miles Turner or Thomas Bryant, so they have a numbers advantage to attack the perimeter and get an open look. But Milwaukee can combat this by shifting to a 2-1-2 and having the middle guy play the high post instead of the rim, which they have done to succession at times. A couple of other notes that I made are things that the Bucks defense hasn't necessarily done yet, but probably should consider doing. For example, TJ McConnell is notorious for being a Bucks killer, and they just have never really been able to stop him. But I think the Boston Celtics found the answer they're looking for, because they experimented with defending McConnell with Luke Kornet in every single game they played against Indy this season. And in their final matchup on December 29th, Kornet was McConnell's primary defender for that game. And the Celtics did this because McConnell can't shoot from the outside, nor does he want to, as he's shooting just 31% from deep on the season, and even in years where he has shot over 40%, he never took more than one attempt per game. And look at how effective Kornet was on McConnell as his primary defender. It's something that's proven to work. Now, I'm not saying that the Bucks need to go stick Brook Lopez on him, but with this information in mind, I think it would be beneficial to play back on TJ McConnell. There's no need to pick him up full court or overpressure him, because that's exactly what he wants you to do, so he can use his speed to blow by you and get to the rim or get to one of his mid-range pull-ups. Playing back on him, daring him to shoot, and going under on screening actions where he's the primary ball handler might finally be Milwaukee's answer to their TJ McConnell problems. And defending Andrew Nembhard in a similar manner may not hurt either, because he's never really been a consistent shooter in the league outside of last year's playoff run. But like McConnell, he's extremely efficient around the rim and in the mid-range, and he'll burn you if you overplay him at the point of attack. I don't think he's someone you give as much room as you do a guy like McConnell, because he is still capable of lighting it up from deep, but just playing a little bit back and going under on screens may not be such a bad idea. And I think Kyle Kuzma is the perfect matchup for him, because he tends to play back on quicker guards anyways to compensate for the fact that he's got less foot speed, and I think his length could be a serious bother for Nembhard at the point of attack. But with defensive schemes out of the way, I think it's time we move on to swing factors in this series, starting with swing factors for the Pacers. And the obvious is the effectiveness of their full court press against guards not named Damian Lillard, as mentioned earlier, because it's just tough to trust Ryan Rollins and Kevin Porter Jr. against this type of pressure with a combined 0 games of playoff experience under their belts. And working in tandem with Indy's full court ball pressure is their ability to force turnovers and get out and run versus Milwaukee's inability to do so, as the Pacers dominated this team in points off turnovers and fast break points during the regular season. And 2 big reasons for this is number 1, their pace, which can really get to some of Milwaukee's older, slower-footed players like Brook Lopez, and number 2 is the Bucks' awful transition defense, which according to NBA efficiencies is the 5th worst transition defense in basketball. And the Bucks will never be able to counter this because it'll be nearly impossible to turn over a Tyrese Halliburton-led offense that took care of the ball at the 3rd best rate this season. To be fair to Milwaukee, they themselves were also pretty good at taking care of the basketball throughout the regular season, even in games without Damian Lillard. But it's tough to say how guys like Ryan Rollins and Kevin Porter Jr. will handle the playoff intensity, as mentioned before. I just trust Halliburton and this Pacers squad far more than I do the Bucks in that category. But the final swing factor for Indy to me is Tyrese Halliburton's matchup, because if it remains Taurean Prince, then I love the Pacers' ability to generate a high volume of open 3-point attempts via Halliburton beating TP at the point of attack and collapsing the defense, because Prince just doesn't have the foot speed to guard Halliburton in space, and when you combine that with TP's tendency to overplay him, it leads to a lot of breakdowns. And as I already said, KPJ and Ryan Rollins would be much better suited to take on this defensive assignment. Hell, even AJ Green and Gary Trent Jr. would be much better options. Maybe Dak could even turn to Ajax for a possession or two like he did in their final matchup of the regular season. just anything but TP. He's much better against wings, so it'll be up to Doc Rivers to adjust accordingly and get TP off the ball. And even if he doesn't, there are ways to help Prince be more effective against Haliburton. For one, not overpressuring him, as we just alluded to. Foot speed in space and screen navigation hurts him. And secondly, he needs to be willing to go under on Miles Turner's screens for Hallie and trust Brook Lopez to defend Tyrese in space, which sounds dangerous and is a big reason for why the Bucks prefer to switch 1 through 4 instead of 1 through 5, so they can keep BL near the rim and away from the perimeter. But I'd much rather switch these Hallie Miles Turner 2-man actions, because having TP fight over with Brook stepping up is an easy recipe for Haliburton to pitch it back to Miles Turner for wide open threes. But if TP just switches straight up, Indy is typically relying on Haliburton to beat Brook Lopez near the sideline with the shot clock winding down. And if BL plays back enough, Hallie doesn't want to drive, which is evidenced by the fact that he takes just 14% of his field goal attempts around the rim, ranking in just the 19th percentile amongst players at his position. He'd much rather settle for threes over the outstretched arms of Lopez, which is a win for BL and the Bucks. Hallie does occasionally beat Brook off the dribble if he sees a driving angle open up, but again, most times he's forced to chuck a contested three, and BL does a good job of making him settle. And even the numbers back this up going back to last year's playoff series. And the same can even be said for Bobby Portis. Haliburton's just not an isolation player, so for the sake of not letting him do what he's best at, by creating offense for his teammates, Taurean Prince needs to make him do something he's uncomfortable with, and let him ISO against the big by going under and switching with Brook Lopez. Which leads us to swing factors for the Milwaukee Bucks, beginning with their lineup versatility, because this isn't the slow old team that the Pacers faced last postseason. This is a younger, lengthier, and much more athletic Bucks team that can throw out a number of different lineups to counter whatever style of play Indiana wants to roll with. For example, Indiana was able to surmount a massive lead in the fourth quarter of their final regular season matchup with Milwaukee this season by going small and plugging in Obi Toppin at the 5 to force Brook Lopez to guard him in space, and this worked great. But the Bucks can counter this by turning to Giannis at the 5, throwing in BP, or even going to Jericho Sims, who's expected to be ready for Game 1 and could be a massive X factor for Milwaukee for a number of different reasons. The main reason being that he gives the Bucks defense the flexibility to switch everything 1 through 5, given he has the foot speed, agility, and athleticism to keep up with perimeter guys. Plus, if he does play against smaller lineups, he can punish them with his tremendous offensive rebounding ability, which is something the Bucks have generally struggled with Jericho off the floor. Sims also allows the Bucks to get away from those weird Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez lineups that tend to get torched defensively. And although he's not a floor spacer, he is capable of playing next to Giannis, as in the 32 minutes they've shared the floor together this season, the two of them have boasted a ridiculous 24.8 net rating. The defense with those two on the floor is dominant, and even offensively, Jericho does a nice job of making himself available to Giannis should he see extra bodies by diving to the rim from the perimeter or roaming the dunker spot. And he can create opportunities for GA like he does with this beautiful Gortat screen here. And it's not just Jericho. The Bucks' new closing lineup of Kevin Porter Jr., AJ Green, Gary Trent Jr., Giannis, and Bobby Portis has been extremely effective, especially in that 2-3 we talked about earlier, as this 5-man unit boasts the second best net rating in the entire league of units that have played at least 40 minutes together. But if you think that sample size is too small, fine. take out BP, who just got back from suspension, and make it a 4-man lineup. Even then, the unit of KPJ, AJ Green, Gary Trent Jr., and Giannis has the 4th best net rating of all 4-man units that have played at least 100 minutes together. Which brings us to the final and most important swing factor for the Bucks in this series. It's Giannis. The Greek Freak is playing some of the best basketball of his career as of late, and his playmaking in particular as the lead offensive initiator has been otherworldly, just based on the way Indy's scheming to guard him and their lack of Giannis defenders on that roster. I fully expect GA to carve up this defense in every which way. And ultimately, Milwaukee having far and away the best player in this series, who's arguably playing the best ball of his career right now, is the biggest swing factor in the Bucks defeating the Pacers in 6 games and avenging their playoff loss from last season, even without Damian Lillard. And for the Pacers fans who will come at me in the comments section for being biased in my prediction, I'll have you know that I picked Indiana to beat Milwaukee last year. So sorry, Pacer fans, I'm just keeping it a buck with y'all this season. No pun intended. But that's gonna do it for today. Let me know down in the comments section below who you've got winning this series and in how many games. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.